Hello there, and welcome to the Dull Science. Whether it's tonight or this afternoon, I'm glad you're here nestled into the rhythm of things. If you feel like sharing, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. And if you're currently in a hammock suspended between two fridge magnets, well, we may have found our target audience. So before you drift off, tap like and subscribe if you're into sleepy science. If not, blink twice and we'll forget this ever happened. Now then, let's ease into the invisible, into something you carry with you every step of the way, though you've never once seen it. The Earth hums with a silent compass. It spins and pulses through stone and soil, drifting overhead in auroras and low orbit. We call it the geomagnetic field, a ghostly swirl born deep within our planet's core, where molten iron convects like soup on a slow boil, spinning with the planet's rotation and generating lines of magnetic force that curve outward from the poles. If you've ever used a compass, then you've tapped into it, a tiny needle swinging on cue, seduced by planetary magnetism. But long before we crafted our first lodestone or bar magnet, other creatures were already listening. Their compasses weren't held in the hand, but housed in feathers, beaks. They were born knowing north. That idea that animals can sense the Earth's magnetic field might feel like something from a folk tale, a charming myth maybe, but it's real. In fact, it may be one of the oldest sensory abilities on the planet. The phenomenon is called magnetoreception, and while the name has the zing of a futuristic Bluetooth feature, it's actually ancient, humble, and wide-reaching. It's been found in bees, birds, fish, frogs, bats, butterflies, turtles, termites, and at least one species of naked mole rat. Though to be fair, naked mole rats seem to have every weird biological feature you can think of. Magnetoreception comes in two known flavors. One is based on physical materials, like magnetite, an iron-rich mineral we'll explore in a moment. The other is more ethereal, involving cryptochrome proteins and the delicate dance of quantum particles. Both mechanisms let animals detect and respond to the magnetic field, as if they were tuned to the quiet background music of the Earth. The field itself is no static thing. It waxes and wanes, shivers in solar storms, drifts its poles, and sometimes, on long geological timescales, reverses entirely. Yet through all this, life has learned to read it. Some animals follow it like a highway, others use it as a homing beacon. A few seem to wear it like a pair of invisible glasses, seeing north the way we might see a lamppost on a foggy night. When physicist Joseph Kirschvink at Caltech began testing human volunteers in shielded Faraday cages, he discovered subtle brain responses when magnetic fields rotated around their heads, even when the participants weren't aware of any change. It was as if some subconscious part of us perked up, recognizing an ancient pattern, a leftover whisper of orientation from a time when knowing direction meant survival. So, what exactly is this field we're all soaking in? The Earth's magnetic field is dipolar, meaning it has two main poles, north and south, much like a bar magnet. But unlike that tidy classroom demo, the geomagnetic field is messy, lopsided, and layered. It stretches from the inner core, a solid ball of iron-nickel alloy the size of Pluto, out through the outer core, where molten iron swirls. That motion generates the geodynamo, a self-sustaining electromagnetic engine spinning beneath our feet. From there, the field lines emerge near the south magnetic pole, arc outward through space, and plunge back in near the north magnetic pole. Not to be confused with the geographic poles, which are pinned by Earth's rotational axis, the magnetic poles drift. At the moment, the North Magnetic Pole is somewhere in the Arctic Ocean, speeding away from Canada towards Siberia at about 40 kilometers per year. A little magnetic wanderlust. This field doesn't just help animals navigate. It shields us from cosmic rays and solar wind, forming the magnetosphere, an invisible bubble that deflects charged particles from the sun. Without it, our atmosphere might be as stripped and sterile as Mars's. And yet, despite its planetary importance, the magnetic field is incredibly subtle. You can't feel it, see it, smell it. For many years, scientists assumed no animal could either. That changed in 1966, when German researcher Wolfgang Wiltschko observed something curious in European robins. In carefully controlled experiments, he found that the birds oriented themselves for migration even when deprived of visual cues, but their direction changed when he altered the surrounding magnetic field. It wasn't just coincidence. The birds were steering by magnetism. Since then, dozens of studies have confirmed similar abilities across species. But here's the curious twist. No one mechanism seems to explain all of it. The robin may be using cryptochromes in its eyes. A pigeon might be detecting magnetite near its beak. Salmon might rely on both. It's a little like asking how animals see color. Some see more, some see less, some see in ways we can't begin to imagine. I sometimes wonder what it would feel like to grow up with that extra sense. Not just seeing where you are, but feeling where you are, down to the alignment of invisible lines in space. Like standing inside a globe that gently tugs you in a preferred direction, a compass etched into your nervous system. Maybe the world wouldn't look different, but it would feel different. Like living inside a map that's always slightly humming beneath your skin. And so, quietly and persistently, nature reads the compass we can't see. A hidden conversation between biology and planet, tuned to fields that pass through mountains, oceans, even our very bones. Let's follow that signal. It begins fittingly with something that belongs both to Earth and to life, a mineral born of ancient magma, magnetically sensitive, and somehow tucked neatly into living cells. Magnetite. Its name sounds almost like a character from Greek mythology, doesn't it? A steely demigod with a strong moral polarity. But magnetite is very real, and it's one of the most magnetic naturally occurring substances known to science. A black iron oxide with the formula Fe(SiO) just has a unique ability to align with external magnetic fields, and animals have found astonishing ways to weave it into their sensory toolkit. The earliest hints came, rather charmingly, from bees. In the 1970s, zoologist Joseph L. Kirschvink, yes, the same scientist who later tested human brains for magnetic responses, began studying honeybee navigation. Bees, as you may know, are splendid navigators. They use the sun, polarized light, floral scents, and even the angle of their waggle dance to communicate food sources. But Kirschvink and his collaborators suspected there was more to their system. Using a clever series of tests, they found that bees could still orient themselves even when the sun was obscured, but only if the Earth's magnetic field was intact. When the field was artificially altered using Helmholtz coils, big looped wires that can create controlled magnetic environments, the bees' sense of direction faltered. Something inside them was reading magnetic signals. Later, electron microscopy revealed tiny particles of magnetite clustered in the bees' abdomens. These were often found near neurons, suggesting a magnetically sensitive biological circuit. A compass, built from stone, folded into tissue, the discovery rippled outward. Soon researchers found magnetite in other creatures: trout, mole rats, pigeons, dolphins. In fact, a now famous 1992 study by Dr. Michael Walker and colleagues found that rainbow trout had specialized magnetite-based receptors in their nasal region, embedded within cells connected to the brain's lateral line system, an ancient structure used for detecting vibrations in water. These magnetic cells were arrayed in chains, like tiny iron filings, poised to pivot in response to magnetic fields and send their signal upstream. It's a beautiful idea, the same mineral used in early compasses, now swimming inside a fish's snout, nudging its neurons toward home. Pigeons, of course, are the poster birds for this talent. In the 2000s, researchers led by David Keyes at the University of Western Australia examined cells in the beaks of homing pigeons and found clusters of magnetite-containing structures, previously suspected to be sensory cells. Though later work showed these might be iron-rich macrophages, a kind of immune cell, the jury is still out. What's clear is that pigeons do respond to changes in the magnetic field, and magnetite may still play a role, perhaps elsewhere in the nervous system. What's curious is that magnetite-based sensing might work not unlike a mechanical lever. Imagine a microscopic chain of iron crystals suspended in a soft cellular matrix. As Earth's magnetic field exerts its pull, the chain twists ever so slightly, bending nearby cell membranes or triggering ion channels. It's like having a compass needle, not in your pocket, but literally inside your nose, jostling tiny gates that send signals to your brain. In fact, in 2006, a group at the University of Munich, led by neuroscientist Henrik Moritzen, conducted an experiment with migratory birds, in which they injected superparamagnetic particles, tiny lab-made magnetic grains, into certain neurons. When these neurons were disrupted, the birds became disoriented, strongly suggesting those pathways were involved in magnetar sensation. Even bacteria get in on the act. Magnetotic bacteria, first discovered in the 1970s by Richard Blakemore, form chains of magnetite crystals called magnetarsons inside their single-celled bodies. These allow the bacteria to align with geomagnetic field lines and swim downward into nutrient-rich sediments, an elegant one-cell solution to environmental navigation. And here's a playful detail I adore. The magnetite crystals in these bacteria are remarkably uniform in size and shape. In some species, they're so precise they'd make a nanotechnologist blush. Life, it seems, figured out how to manufacture ideal magnetic sensors long before we built compasses or smartphones. So how do animals know where north is? Just from a few flecks of magnetite? The answer lies in the brain's ability to integrate those signals with memory, light cues, and environmental textures. For migratory species, this means a sort of multimodal map, in which magnetic information provides a skeletal scaffold upon which other senses, smell, vision, celestial position, can be layered. In one memorable 2001 study, researchers tethered spiny lobsters to a mobile platform surrounded by magnets. I imagine the lobsters were politely confused. But as the researchers rotated the magnetic field around them, the lobsters adjusted their direction of movement, suggesting they were sensing the rotation and attempting to reorient toward their internal goal. What that goal was, lobster-wise, remains open to speculation. Possibly snacks. It's easy to overlook minerals as something lifeless, inert, things we dig up, polish, or crush into powders. But magnetite, nestled in cells, tells a different story. Here is a stone that does not just sit in the earth, it speaks to the earth, or more precisely, it listens. Tuning into a signal we cannot hear, turning that signal into motion, memory, migration. I sometimes wonder if animals with magnetite-based senses ever feel a sort of deep planetary intuition. Not just go north, but the world is curved this way. Not a thought, but a knowing. Like moss growing toward shade or vines following a trellis, only with direction, longitude and line of force precision. And perhaps that is why so many animals seem unhurried in their travels. They're not lost, because they were never disconnected. The compass doesn't shout. It hums. And now from the tiny stones nestled in bees and fish, we turn to something altogether stranger. Less mineral, more molecule, less hardware, more quantum whisper. It's hard to imagine anything quieter than a photon brushing past a molecule, except perhaps the thought that this might help a bird see which way is north. And yet, that's exactly the mystery we now find ourselves spiraling into, past iron crystals and into the blue-lit realm of cryptochrome. Unlike magnetite, cryptochromes are not minerals, but proteins. They're found in the cells of plants, insects and animals, including humans, and they were first discovered in the 1990s during research into how organisms track daylight. As their name suggests, crypto for hidden, chrome for color, they're light-sensitive molecules, often nestled in the retinas of eyes, and they play a crucial role in regulating circadian rhythms. But as it turns out, that may only be the beginning of their resume. In birds, especially migratory ones like robins, warblers and thrushes, cryptochromes appear to do something astonishing. They help the bird detect Earth's magnetic field by altering their chemical state in response to it. And they do it using quantum physics. The leading theory, first proposed by physicist Klaus Schulten and his colleagues in 2000, is something called the radical pair mechanism. In essence, when blue light strikes a cryptochrome molecule, it excites an electron, causing it to jump from one part of the molecule to another, leaving behind a partner. The result is a pair of unpaired electrons, each spinning like tiny tops. Their spins can become quantum entangled, meaning their behavior is linked across space and time, however briefly. Here's where it gets beautifully strange. The alignment of Earth's magnetic field affects how these electron pairs behave. Specifically, it influences the probability of them flipping between two states, singlet and triplet, which in turn affects the chemical reactions that follow. If the cryptochrome's chemical output changes depending on magnetic direction, and if enough of these reactions occur across the retina, then the bird might experience this as a visual pattern, perhaps a subtle darkening or lightening depending on heading. Imagine that. Not just sensing the field, but seeing it, overlaid on the sky. a magnetic shadow cast across their field of vision, invisible to us, but as familiar to them as sun or horizon. Supporting this idea, researchers like Henrik Moritzen and Peter Hoare have found that disrupting birds' exposure to blue light or magnetic fields impairs their ability to orient during migration. One study in 2004 exposed European robins to different wavelengths of light, finding that orientation only worked under blue or green light, never red, strongly implying a light-sensitive magnetic process. Further studies in zebra finches and garden warblers suggest that cryptochrome is most active in specific layers of the retina, and in some cases concentrated in regions that align with the visual axis, like tiny directional beacons embedded in the eye itself. But cryptochrome's talents don't end with birds. In 2016, biologists led by Stephen Reppert discovered that fruit flies, of all creatures, could also detect magnetic fields, and that knocking out the gene for cryptochrome abolished this ability. The gene, called Cry1, appears remarkably conserved across species, meaning that nature has kept this molecular antenna for millions, possibly billions of years. In mammals, the situation is more mysterious. Most of us have cryptochromes, and they clearly help regulate circadian rhythms, but whether they also function as magnetic sensors is still hotly debated. Some recent experiments hint that human cryptochrome may respond to magnetic fields in vitro, but what that means for our perception is still unknown. If it happens at all, it may be too faint to notice consciously, a background murmur lost beneath the din of modern life. Still, I like the thought that somewhere, deep in the chemistry of our eyes, something ancient flickers, something blue and quantum, and just maybe directional. There's a delicious irony here. Cryptochrome works by embracing uncertainty. At the molecular level, it relies on probabilities, entangled states, and spin dynamics, things that defy common sense. And yet the end result is something deeply reliable, a bird finding its way across continents through storm and starlight, back to the very tree it hatched in. It's as if a feathered creature, lighter than a letter, carries a quantum compass built from nothing but light and protein, and it works better than our best GPS. Now, not every bird sees magnetic fields, and those that do may interpret them differently. Some scientists suspect the magnetic pattern may appear as a gradient overlay, or a shifting contrast filter on the bird's field of vision. Others imagine a ring of light that tilts as the bird's head moves, guiding them subtly but surely. We don't know, because we can't see through their eyes. But what we do know is that when birds are disoriented by changes to magnetic fields or blue light exposure, they don't just get lost, they seem genuinely confused, as if a sense they didn't know they had suddenly vanished. In one particularly evocative experiment, robins placed inside an enclosure with an altered magnetic field began to orient in the wrong migratory direction. When the field was returned to normal, they corrected course as though a fog had lifted. I like to picture that moment. A tiny bird, blinking in the artificial dawn, tilting its head. For a moment something feels off, the world doesn't line up right. Then the molecules align, the spins fall into place, and the map returns, and off it goes, into the sky. So now we've seen two lenses through which animals perceive the magnetic world, one built from stone and structure, and the other from photons and chance. Let's take to the skies next. To a bird that has been guiding human fascination for centuries. One that combines every trick of the natural compass into a feat of astonishing accuracy. Somewhere above a sun-drenched field, a speck appears, gray, fast, unwavering. It circles once, then dives, not to land, but to reorient. A quick tilt of the wings, a pulse of wind through feathers, and it's gone again, vanishing into the blue with a confidence that borders on uncanny. The homing pigeon. If there's one creature that has earned the title of aerial cartographer, it's this humble bird. For centuries, pigeons have amazed and mildly baffled their human companions with their ability to return, often across vast distances through unfamiliar terrain, in shifting weather, to the precise spot they consider home. It's no wonder that for thousands of years, humans enlisted them as airborne messengers. Even Julius Caesar had a few in his military comms department, possibly with little helmets. But how does a pigeon know where home is? As it turns out, the answer isn't simple, because pigeons don't rely on just one sense. They're multimodal navigators, combining visual landmarks, olfactory cues, sun position, infrasound, and yes, magnetic field information, into a robust internal GPS. or perhaps it's better to say, into a remarkably feathered Bayesian probability engine. Let's unpack that a little. The magnetic sense in pigeons has long been a source of scientific intrigue. In a seminal 1972 study by William Keaton at Cornell University, pigeons were released on overcast days with small bar magnets attached to their heads. The result? Their homing accuracy dropped significantly. On sunny days, they did fine, suggesting that the magnetic sense was most useful when solar cues were unavailable. Later studies by Wolfgang Wiltschko and Roswitha Wiltschko, a German husband and wife research team who have essentially written the textbook on avian navigation, found that young pigeons learn the magnetic map of their region early in life. They called it the magnetic map hypothesis. The idea that pigeons imprint on the intensity and inclination angle of the local magnetic field, allowing them to detect when they've moved away from home and in which direction. But magnetism is just one layer. Consider olfaction. In 2004, researcher Anna Gagliardo, in Pisa, conducted an elegant experiment. She released pigeons with their sense of smell temporarily blocked. The birds flew around in circles, clearly disoriented. Once their olfaction returned, so did their directional prowess. Somehow the magnetic field tells them where they are, and the scent map helps them decide which way to go. There's also the sun compass, a mechanism by which pigeons can use the position of the sun, coupled with an internal circadian clock, to gauge direction. When pigeons have their internal clocks shifted, by keeping them under artificial light, their directional choices shift accordingly, until the sun's true position becomes apparent again. And delightfully, some studies have even suggested pigeons might use infrasound, low-frequency vibrations, that travel long distances through the ground and air. These sounds, generated by ocean waves and atmospheric turbulence, form a kind of seismic murmur that pigeons may be able to detect and associate with home. To make matters even more fascinating, pigeons appear to form cognitive maps, remembering key landmarks, topographic features, and possibly even sequences of turns along familiar routes. In one study by Hans-Peter Lipp, pigeons trained on winding routes with multiple detours often took shortcuts home, suggesting they had constructed an internal geometric understanding of the landscape, not just a memorized path. In essence, a pigeon's navigation system is less like a single compass needle and more like a symphony of cues. Magnetoreception may help when visual information is missing. Smell and sound may kick in when magnetic anomalies arise. And when all systems agree, the bird flies like it's being pulled by a silken thread. Now about that magnetoreception in the beak, here's where science got a little messy. In the 2000s, several papers claimed to have located iron-rich neurons in the upper beak of pigeons that could serve as magnetic sensors. These cells were thought to be packed with magnetite and connected directly to the trigeminal nerve. It was elegant, promising, and widely cited. But in 2012, David Keyes and his team published a study that re-examined the same structures and found something unexpected. Those magnetic neurons were actually macrophages, part of the immune system. Not sensory cells at all. They contained iron, yes, but not in a way that suggested sensory function. The field was stunned. Still, the trigeminal nerve is involved in magnetic navigation. Disabling it impairs a pigeon's ability to orient correctly. So the mystery remains, if not the beak, then where? One possibility is the lagina, a structure in the inner ear. Another is the ophthalmic branch of the trigeminal nerve, which might carry magnetic information from deep-seated receptors no one has yet identified. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, except the needle might be nanoscopic, and the haystack is also moving. Meanwhile, pigeons keep flying. Unfazed, unbothered, utterly efficient. I once read about a pigeon that was released in England and made its way home to Italy in just under 3 weeks. It crossed the Alps, ate well, slept on old roofs. And it did all of this without a compass app or Google Maps. Just wings, instinct, and an internal suite of sensors we barely understand. What's more, pigeons aren't born with the entire toolkit fully calibrated. They learn their map. Juveniles need time to build experience, to practice aligning different cues and resolving discrepancies. And they're not perfect. Sometimes they get lost. But more often than not, they find their way. It's humbling, isn't it?
That in a world where we often feel untethered without our devices, these small fluttering creatures, common enough to be ignored, carry a natural orientation so elegant, it puts our technology to shame. And so from the steady wings of the pigeon, we now turn toward a more liquid route. A migration not through air, but ocean, a journey just as long, and just as magnetically guided. Imagine swimming blindfolded through a featureless, ever-moving blue world for thousands of miles, over years, and somehow arriving precisely where you began, down to the very stretch of beach where you first cracked out of an egg, legs flailing. This is the quiet triumph of the sea turtle. Their migrations are some of the most ambitious in the animal kingdom, rivaling those of birds and salmon. Leatherbacks roam from Nova Scotia to the tropics. Loggerheads cross entire oceans, gliding from Japan to California, and back again. And when it's time to nest, females return unerringly to their natal beaches, locations they haven't seen in decades. So how do they do it? Once again, the Earth itself is part of the answer. Sea turtles are sensitive to the geomagnetic field, and mounting evidence suggests they use it as a navigational chart. But not just for simple direction, north versus south. Turtles, it seems, can detect two key magnetic parameters: intensity and inclination angle. Magnetic intensity refers to the strength of the local field. It's like knowing how loud the Earth's magnetic hum is in a given place. Inclination angle, meanwhile, describes how the magnetic field lines slope into the Earth's surface. Near the magnetic equator, the field is horizontal. Near the poles, it plunges steeply. These two variables create a unique magnetic signature at every point on the planet. In a 2001 study led by Kenneth Lohman at the University of North Carolina, hatchling loggerhead turtles were placed in a lab-controlled tank surrounded by a magnetic coil system that simulated different regions of the Earth's field. The hatchlings adjusted their swimming direction in ways that matched what they would do in the wild, depending on whether the simulated field matched a northern, southern, eastern, or western location in their migratory range. They behaved, in short, like animals reading a map, a magnetic map, and they seemed to memorize these signatures. As young turtles drift on ocean currents, they collect information about the magnetic landscape, forming a kind of internal atlas. Decades later, they consult this map to locate their birth beaches, an extraordinary feat of both memory and sensitivity. Lohman and his team went further. They showed that genetic differences among nesting populations of loggerheads correlate with differences in magnetic field parameters at the nesting sites. In other words, the turtles' genomes may be locally adapted to recognize and home in on their native magnetic signature. A magnetogenetic homing beacon, passed through generations. But Earth's magnetic field is not fixed. It drifts. It wobbles. Over years and decades, the intensity and inclination shift slightly, dragging the coordinates of magnetic landmarks across the globe. And turtles, ever responsive, seem to drift with them. A 2015 study by Cameron et al. Found that nesting sites for loggerhead turtles had shifted geographically over time in ways that mirrored the changes in the magnetic field. Turtles didn't return to the geographic beach where they were born, but to the magnetic location that matched it. This raises a subtle but poetic idea, that a turtle's idea of home is not a fixed point in space, but a place in the field, an echo in the invisible compass. Of course, magnetoreception isn't the only tool in their kit. Turtles likely integrate it with ocean current cues, chemical signatures, and possibly celestial orientation. But when scientists disrupt the magnetic field near nesting beaches using magnets or coils, turtles become disoriented. The field clearly plays a central role. And unlike pigeons, turtles don't get much chance to practice. Many spend decades at sea before making their first return trip. They don't fly over the landscape and memorize visual markers. They don't follow coastlines. They float in open ocean for years, maturing slowly, quietly soaking in information about their watery world. One might say they feel the map rather than read it. Their senses may be distributed too. Some evidence points to magnetic particles in the brain, others in skin or muscle tissue. The precise location of their magnetic sensors remains elusive, but the effect is unmistakable. It's not always perfect. Artificial light on nesting beaches can disrupt orientation. Submerged power cables and magnetically noisy environments near shorelines can scramble their compass. Still, the turtles return. One by one, wave by wave, they crawl from the sea, heavy with life and purpose, to lay eggs in sand where their own shells once cracked. It's a slow ritual, older than us by tens of millions of years. The earth turns, the field shifts, the oceans rise, but the turtles keep coming, pulled not by memory alone, but by a force humming through the core of the planet. To hold such a sense within oneself, subtle, stable, and unerring, is to carry the planet's own story. A magnetic whisper that says, "You are here. You've always been here."
And now we turn from sea to stream. Another ancient traveller, salmon know a path from mountain spring to ocean and back again. One born not of schooling or mimicry, but of invisible cues folded into muscle and mind. There's a river I once saw in the Pacific Northwest, narrow, glinting in the dusk, its water barely ankle deep. It didn't look like much, just a ripple over smooth stones. And yet that trickle was the final destination in a journey that had begun thousands of miles away in the open ocean. A salmon stream. To the salmon that returned to it, that stream is no mere feature of the landscape. It is a birthplace, a promise, a memory so old it predates memory. And astonishingly, many of these fish find their way back with such precision that they arrive not just to the correct river system, but to the very branch of a tributary where they first wriggled into life. Their journey is a marvel of endurance, but also of orientation. Because somewhere along the way, in those long years at sea, salmon read something in the earth itself. A quiet cue guiding them toward home. And once again, we find ourselves in the realm of magnetoreception. For decades, scientists wondered how salmon pulled off their feats of navigation. Olfactory cues clearly play a role in the final stages. Salmon are famous for their ability to smell their natal stream once they're nearby, but this only works when they're already close. What about the vast middle stretch, where no scents linger? Enter the magnetic field. In a groundbreaking 2013 study published in Current Biology, a team led by Nathan Putman at Oregon State University tested young Chinook salmon in a large circular tank surrounded by electromagnetic coils. These coils simulated the magnetic field conditions the salmon would encounter at various locations along their migration routes. The results were startling. When exposed to a field resembling the northern limits of their ocean range, the salmon oriented south. When given a southern magnetic field, they turned north. This wasn't a random response. It was directional, consistent, and adaptive. The fish were navigating a virtual map using magnetism alone. Putman and his colleagues proposed that salmon possess a magnetic map sense, similar to that seen in turtles and birds, allowing them to determine both direction and position based on the intensity and inclination angle of the geomagnetic field. In essence, the fish knew not just which way to swim, but where they were. This idea found further support in long-term field data. In a 2014 study, Putman and Lohman examined decades of salmon returns and found that the migratory routes of sockeye salmon changed in concert with natural fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. When the geomagnetic signatures of familiar paths weakened or shifted, salmon routes altered accordingly. And just as with turtles, salmon appear to imprint on magnetic information during their early lives. Hatchlings raised in certain magnetic conditions later respond to those same cues during simulated migrations. It's as if the young fish store a snapshot of the field and consult it years later, like holding up a childhood photograph to navigate the adult world. What's more, this magnetic sensitivity seems to be inherited, with different populations of salmon adapting to the specific field characteristics of their natal rivers. In other words, the invisible cues vary slightly from river to river, and so do the genetic traits that help the fish recognize them. This localized adaptation may help explain why salmon maintain such high fidelity to their birthplaces. But the salmon's magnetic journey isn't purely instinctual, there's nuance. Flexibility. Some fish stray, some improvise, some even colonize new streams. Evolutionarily speaking, this bet hedging ensures that the species isn't locked into a failing route if a river dries or changes course. A magnetic system, yes, but not a rigid one. The internal machinery responsible for this sense is still elusive. Some researchers suspect magnetite particles embedded in tissues near the nasal cavity or lateral line. Others lean toward cryptochrome proteins playing a role, perhaps deep within the pineal gland or retina. But as with pigeons and turtles, the precise anatomy of salmon magnetoreception remains an open question. There's something deeply poetic about this. The more we learn, the more nature keeps a few secrets tucked behind the gills. And of course, salmon don't swim in solitude. As they navigate these magnetic lanes across the Pacific, they're joined by others, sharks, eels, whales, many of whom may also be navigating by the Earth's quiet song. The European eel, for instance, undertakes a reverse journey. Born in the Sargasso Sea, it travels thousands of kilometers to freshwater rivers across Europe, before returning to its birthplace to spawn and die. Eel larvae, like young salmon, have been shown to orient in response to magnetic fields, suggesting they too are following ancient invisible trails. The idea that the sea itself is laced with magnetic memory is both humbling and oddly comforting. Beneath the waves, where no roads exist and the stars can't guide you, these animals find their way using something that is always present, always steady, unless of course we interfere. Because modern life has not been kind to the magnetic realm, power lines, submarine cables, undersea pipelines, all of them produce electromagnetic noise that may disrupt or mask the natural field. In some areas, the signals are strong enough to confuse fish, misdirect turtles, or even deter whales. It's like trying to navigate with a compass while someone is waving a giant refrigerator over your head. And yet, the fish keep swimming. If you've ever stood on a rocky riverbank and watched a salmon leap, a flash of muscle, a spray of water, you've seen something ancient. Not just determination, but orientation. A dance with gravity, with time, with fields laid down by the spinning iron of our planet, and somehow, impossibly, they know the way. From salmon runs to starlit skies, magnetoreception is everywhere, quietly operating beneath the surface. But what happens when that surface gets noisy? When the field becomes crowded? Let's look now at how our inventions, our wires and waves, are making life more complicated for nature's oldest navigators. Out by the old substation near the woods, there's a hum you can hear if you stand close enough, a deep electric murmur rising off the high-tension lines. It's the sound of our modern world coursing through copper and steel. To us, it's background noise. But to some animals, it might feel like standing inside a planet that's forgotten its tune. Because when it comes to navigation, electromagnetic noise is more than an inconvenience. It's a distortion of the very compass many species rely on. This interference, often invisible and unintended, is quietly complicating a sense millions of creatures use to move, migrate, and mate. And as our electrical infrastructure grows, power lines, undersea cables, wireless signals, the old magnetic map is getting a little harder to read. Let's start with a bird. In 2014, researchers from the University of Oldenburg in Germany published a paper in Nature describing a strange problem. For years, they'd been studying the magnetic orientation of European robins, using a lab on campus designed to simulate migratory conditions. But increasingly the birds seemed confused, failing to orient as expected, even though all magnetic and visual controls were in place. Eventually the scientists tried something drastic. They shielded the lab from weak electromagnetic noise, specifically frequencies between 50 kHz and 5 MHz, well below most consumer electronics. And like a light switch flipping on, the bird's magnetic sense returned. The implication was astonishing. Everyday electronic devices, even in relatively quiet urban environments, were enough to scramble the robin's magnetoreception. Not powerful transmitters, but the low-level hum of human civilization. Other studies soon followed. In 2020, a team working in the UK showed that migratory garden warblers, exposed to simulated electromagnetic fields, lost their ability to orient correctly. When the interference was removed, they recovered. It wasn't lethal, but it was disorienting. A fog across the mental map, and the effect doesn't stop at birds. In the ocean, where magnetic fields guide many species across immense distances, undersea cables have become a growing concern. These cables, often carrying high-voltage direct current, generate magnetic fields that can alter local geomagnetic conditions. Take elasmobranchs, a fancy umbrella term for sharks, rays, and skates. Many of these animals use electroreception to detect prey, but also respond to Earth's magnetic field during migration. A 2009 study in marine biology found that certain skate species would avoid crossing areas near power cables, possibly because the cable's fields created a kind of magnetic barrier. Salmon, too, have shown altered behavior near underwater cables.
Some appear to hesitate or circle when approaching active cables, though responses vary by species and life stage. The field distortions aren't enormous, but they may be enough to trigger confusion or delay. We're not talking about cataclysmic interference. This isn't a meteor strike. It's more like trying to read a compass in a room full of magnets. The signal is still there, but harder to hear. It's not just power transmission, either. Magnetic anomalies created by metal structures, bridges, buildings, buried pipes, can also warp the field. For migratory species passing through urbanized areas, this creates a landscape not just physically altered, but magnetically polluted. A cartographic uncanny valley. And like so much in ecology, the effects are complex. Some species adapt or compensate using other cues, sun, stars, landmarks. Others might be delayed, rerouted, or fail to arrive altogether. The consequences may unfold not in dramatic crashes, but in missed matings, lost nests, dwindling returns over generations. There are efforts to mitigate. Engineers designing new submarine cables now account for electromagnetic emissions, adding shielding or choosing less sensitive corridors. Wildlife biologists work with utility companies to assess migration routes. In some regions, conservationists create magnetic quiet zones, areas buffered from strong EM fields, where sensitive species can nest, breed, or rest without confusion. One fascinating approach involves field mapping, detailed surveys of ambient magnetic conditions to identify anomalies. These maps help predict which areas might disrupt navigation and guide future planning. Like putting up road signs that only birds and fish can read, but we're still in early days. For now, much of the electromagnetic footprint we leave is unmeasured, its effects poorly understood. A silent fog of interference, drifting through cities, coastlines, forests. It makes you wonder how much of the natural map have we overwritten, how many migrations have subtly warped, routes bent like heat on asphalt. If the Earth's magnetic field is a global song, perhaps we've added a few discordant notes. And yet, animals persist. Many continue to find their way, adjusting, recalibrating. There's a resilience there, life's quiet ability to navigate in spite of us. Still, the idea that we may be jamming an ancient channel with our buzzing wires feels like something worth attending to, because magnetoreception is not just a curiosity, it's not a party trick, it's part of the deep time contract between biology and Earth, and as we've seen, it exists in places we might not expect, even in ourselves. Let's follow that signal inward now, to the human compass, buried deep and possibly still flickering. There's a certain romance to the idea that we humans, in all our GPS dependence and grid-based navigation, might still carry a ghost of the Earth's magnetic whisper inside us. A faded trace of something ancient, tucked behind our temples or nestled in our retinas, quietly aligning us with the poles. It might sound fanciful, like a sense we forgot to evolve, but the question isn't whether we navigate by magnetic field the way salmon or pigeons do. The question is, could we? And according to some intriguing science, the answer might be, maybe. Let's start with the basics. Humans don't exhibit clear, consistent behavioral magnetoreception. We don't walk into a room and instinctively know which way is geomagnetic north. We don't migrate with unerring precision to ancestral villages. Some of us can't even find the coffee shop we just left. But biology has a way of holding on to old tools, even when they go unused. And over the past few decades, a few researchers have gone digging for a buried compass. One of the most compelling studies came from Caltech's Joseph Kirschvink, a name we've met before, flitting in and out of animal magnetism, like a patient ghost. In 2019, Kirschvink and his colleagues built a Faraday cage in their lab, a sealed chamber shielded from external electromagnetic fields, where they could control the magnetic environment with exquisite precision. They recruited volunteers, placed them in the cage with EEG electrodes on their scalps, and gently rotated the magnetic field around them while recording their brain activity. The results were subtle, but striking. The participants' brains showed alpha wave modulations in response to changes in magnetic direction. In particular, when the field rotated counterclockwise into a downward orientation, mimicking natural conditions in the northern hemisphere, certain individuals displayed a noticeable dip in alpha power, a common marker of sensory processing. In short, the brain responded to the change, even though the person wasn't consciously aware of it. This kind of subconscious awareness is often called cryptoperception, sensing something without knowing you're sensing it. like a gentle draft on the skin or a shift in atmospheric pressure. We don't always know we've felt it until our behavior quietly shifts. Interestingly, the study found asymmetry in responses. Not everyone showed the effect, and some magnetic directions triggered stronger reactions than others. This might reflect differences in biology, prior exposure, or simply the faded nature of the sense itself, like a muscle long unused. Where then might this compass reside? One theory points to cryptochromes, the same quantum-sensitive proteins found in birds' eyes. Humans have them too. Specifically Cry1 and Cry2, both active in our retinas and involved in regulating circadian rhythms. In 2011, a study by Thorsten Ritz and colleagues showed that human cryptochrome can function as a magnetically sensitive protein in vitro, meaning in a petri dish, it responds to changes in magnetic field just as it might in birds. But whether this sensitivity plays any role in human perception remains unresolved. It could be a vestigial trait, like goosebumps, or it could subtly shape our sense of place in ways we haven't yet learned to measure. There are older hints too. Anthropologist Robin Baker once ran a series of experiments in the 1970s and 80s in which blindfolded participants were spun in a chair and asked to point north. Some performed significantly better than chance, though replication of these findings has been inconsistent and methodological concerns abound. Others have proposed that human orientation skills, those mysterious folks who just know which way is which, might involve weak magnetic sensitivity, layered with environmental awareness and subtle cues like light polarization or wind direction. But science is a cautious traveler. As of now, there's no definitive proof that humans possess a functional magnetoreceptive sense we can access behaviorally. Still, the brainwave evidence, the cryptochrome sensitivity, and the tantalizing patterns in anecdotal orientation all suggest there may be embers left of a once-burning sense. One could imagine early humans roaming, foraging, navigating vast, unmapped landscapes, evolving to detect subtle shifts in Earth's magnetic rhythm. Over time, as language, memory and tools evolved, that ancient sense may have faded into the background, replaced by stars, landmarks, and now, satellite maps. But some researchers aren't ready to give up on us just yet. A fascinating experiment published in 2022 by Japanese neuroscientists used transcranial magnetic stimulation (TMS) to interfere with brain regions involved in spatial orientation. When combined with artificially manipulated magnetic fields, they observed changes in navigational behavior during virtual maze tasks, suggesting that some part of the brain might still reference magnetic cues, however unconsciously. Others are exploring whether people who spend more time outdoors, hikers, indigenous trackers, nomads, might retain stronger sensitivity to magnetic information, perhaps through unconscious calibration over time. And then there's the possibility that we may be responding to magnetic fields in ways that have nothing to do with direction, perhaps regulating biological clocks, mood, or hormone cycles. After all, our cells operate on electrochemical gradients. It's not so far-fetched to think they might hum in tune with planetary rhythms. Even if we can't use magnetism to find our keys, it may be shaping us quietly, like a tide we don't know we're swimming in. I sometimes wonder if that explains a certain comfort we feel when oriented towards something, a mountain, a trail, the ocean. Or why getting lost feels not just inconvenient, but existential. Perhaps there's a ghost sense stirring, whispering that we've turned wrong in a way deeper than the map can explain. And so, even if our compass is cracked, its pieces still rattle faintly in the drawer. Maybe all it takes is a little tuning to feel the Earth again, not as a concept, but as a direction. But what happens when the planet itself flips the script? When north becomes south, and the whole field reverses? Let's dive next into deep time, where the Earth's compass has flipped again and again, and life somehow has kept on going. Every few 100,000 years, the Earth decides to turn its magnetic coat inside out. North becomes south, and south becomes north, not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, like a ship adjusting course by imperceptible degrees. This is a geomagnetic reversal, and it's one of the more curious tricks our planet likes to play. To be clear, a reversal isn't the same as the poles wandering, which they do constantly, like tipsy wanderers staggering across the Arctic. A full reversal is when the dipolar field flips entirely, causing compass needles, if they'd existed back then, to point the other way. It's happened many times, at least 183 documented flips over the last 83 million years, according to geologic records. The last one occurred about 780,000 years ago, during the Bruns-Matuyama reversal, which means we're somewhat overdue, geologically speaking. But don't worry, it's not the sort of thing that happens overnight. Reversals typically unfold over thousands to tens of thousands of years, with the field weakening, fragmenting into complex multipoles, and eventually reassembling in reverse. So what happens to animals, especially those that rely on the geomagnetic field, when the whole thing flips? At first glance, you might imagine chaos: birds flying backward, turtles beaching themselves in Iceland, salmon arriving en masse in the wrong estuaries. But nature, it seems, is a little more graceful than that. Evidence suggests that life keeps going during magnetic reversals. Extinction events don't appear to correlate neatly with flips. In fact, some species may hardly notice. Navigation continues. Migration adapts. Evolution finds a way to tune into the changing signal. Let's take a look at how we know this. First, paleomagnetism. That's the science of reading the ancient magnetic field preserved in rocks. When volcanic lava cools, iron-rich minerals within it align with the local geomagnetic field like tiny compass needles, then freeze in place. By analyzing sequences of lava flows and sediments, scientists can reconstruct the history of Earth's magnetic polarity. During periods of reversal, these records show a weakening of the field, sometimes to less than 10% of its current strength, and the emergence of multiple poles. The field doesn't vanish, but it becomes erratic. Compasses wouldn't have just pointed wrong, they would have spun like weather vanes in a tornado. So how would animals respond? One clue comes from fossil migration patterns. In sediments laid down during known reversal periods, we don't see evidence of widespread disorientation. Turtles still nested, whales still moved, birds still flew. Another clue comes from magnetotactic bacteria, those single-celled marvels that build magnetite chains to align with the field. Fossils of these bacteria span multiple reversals, suggesting they simply recalibrated. North is north, whether you call it that or not. And here's where evolution gets elegant. It's possible that some species evolve flexible magnetoreception, not hardwired to a fixed pole but responsive to gradient cues, such as the inclination angle, the steepness of field lines, or intensity. These parameters still vary smoothly across the globe, even when the field reverses. If an animal uses these gradients instead of true north, then the reversal might feel like little more than a mild shift. In 2006, a study by Kirschvink and Hagedorn proposed that inclination-based orientation could provide a robust fallback during reversals. A bird using inclination might still migrate north in a magnetic sense, even if the pole had flipped, because it was following the same slope pattern it had imprinted on. It's also worth noting that most reversals take millennia to complete, giving species time to adjust. Unlike sudden events like asteroid impacts or supervolcanoes, reversals offer a long, slow window for recalibration. That said, there could be consequences. A weakened magnetic field offers less protection from cosmic rays and solar wind, which are normally deflected by the magnetosphere. During reversal periods, more radiation might reach the Earth's surface, potentially affecting mutation rates, atmospheric chemistry, or even cloud formation. Some have speculated about links to climate shifts, though the evidence is murky at best. In one intriguing 2018 paper, scientists found that a temporary magnetic collapse around 42,000 years ago, known as the Larchant excursion, coincided with a burst of climatic instability and behavioral changes in ancient human populations. Increased UV radiation, auroras near the equator, and even the decline of large mammals have all been linked, tentatively, to this magnetic hiccup. Did early humans sense it? Did they notice the northern lights flaring across what's now Africa? Did their internal clocks waver, their health subtly bend under increased radiation? Or did they simply adapt, as we always do, to another phase in Earth's long rhythm? It's humbling to think that our species may have walked through a magnetic storm without a name for it. That while we built fires and painted caves, the sky above us was shifting, not in stars but in field lines. Today, satellites monitor the geomagnetic field with exquisite detail. We've watched as the South Atlantic anomaly, a region of particularly weak field over South America, continues to grow. We know that the magnetic North Pole is accelerating in its drift, migrating from Canada toward Siberia at over 50 kilometers per year. These changes may or may not signal an impending reversal. The field has wandered before without flipping. But it does remind us that even the ground beneath our compasses is in motion. And through it all, life stays tuned. Animals adjust, senses recalibrate. Magnetic maps are not inked in iron, but drawn in driftwood. Because while the field may reverse, the instinct to move, to migrate, to return, that endures. Let's look now at how such instincts may have shaped the very fabric of life on Earth. Not just behavior, but evolution, guided in part by a compass etched in time.
Somewhere in the sedimentary folds of deep time, tucked between the fossilized trilobites and the soot-laced traces of long-cooled lava, lies a quiet story of direction. Not just the tale of how life moves, but how it changes. Because magnetoreception, that delicate sense we've followed through birds and turtles and salmon, isn't merely a navigational trick. It may also be an evolutionary force, gently steering the arc of life over millions of years. Let's start with the idea that evolution tends to favor traits that enhance survival and reproduction. If knowing where you are or where you're going confers an advantage, then even a faint sensitivity to magnetic fields could become a selected trait. Over time, the animal with a slightly better compass might out-reproduce its more directionally challenged cousin. Evolution, after all, doesn't need perfection, just better odds. And in environments where orientation is critical, like vast oceans, migratory corridors, or featureless plains, that advantage can add up. Take, for instance, migratory behavior itself. Movement allows animals to exploit seasonal resources, escape predators, and find mates. But movement without orientation is chaos. Magnetoreception may have been a prerequisite for long-distance migration to evolve in the first place. This idea is supported by how widespread yet scattered magnetoreception is across the tree of life. It shows up in insects, birds, fish, amphibians, and even some mammals, but not in neat evolutionary clusters. Instead, it appears to have evolved independently multiple times, a phenomenon known as convergent evolution. In other words, different lineages arrived at magnetoreception through different means. Some via magnetite crystals, others via cryptochrome-based photoreception, like travelers building their own compasses, tuned to the same invisible map. Why might that happen? Because the Earth's magnetic field is one of the few global constants in the environment. It's everywhere, stable, reliable, and relatively unchanging over the timescales that matter to most species. Any life form that evolves the ability to read it gains a map not just of space, but of possibility. Some researchers suggest that speciation, the formation of new species, may even be influenced by magnetoreception. For instance, if two populations of the same species migrate along different magnetic routes or imprint on distinct magnetic landmarks, they may become isolated over time. Different paths, different homes, different mates. Genetic drift does the rest. In 2015, a study by Brothers and Lohman on loggerhead sea turtles found that genetic differences between nesting populations correlated strongly with magnetic field gradients. The implication? Turtles nesting at sites with distinct magnetic signatures were more genetically distinct than those nesting in similar magnetic environments. In effect, the magnetic map may act as a reproductive isolating mechanism, a subtle boundary between populations. A similar pattern has been observed in European robins and Pacific salmon, species whose migratory fidelity to magnetically distinct breeding grounds may slowly spin the wheel of divergence. Magnetoreception might even play a role in phenotypic plasticity, the ability of an organism to change its behavior or physiology in response to environmental conditions. If magnetic fields influence hormone levels, neural development, or circadian rhythms, as some studies suggest, then animals may develop differently depending on their magnetic environment. Over evolutionary time, such plasticity could lead to fixed adaptations. And then there are the origin stories, those speculative, twinkling thoughts at the edge of science. Some have wondered if magnetoreception might trace its roots back to the earliest life, when magnetotactic bacteria first formed chains of magnetite to align with the field. These bacteria still exist today, elegant and ancient,
their little magnetic sensors guiding them into sediment zones rich in nutrients and low in oxygen. From them, it's just a short evolutionary hop to the idea that eukaryotic cells, the kind that make up plants, animals, and us, may have inherited not just mitochondria, but the faint legacy of directional awareness. It's a romantic idea, perhaps, but science has always allowed room for wonder, provided we keep our boots muddy with evidence. So far, our boots take us to creatures like spiny lobsters, who migrate in single file along the ocean floor, seemingly guided by magnetic orientation, or mole rats, who build their burrows aligned with magnetic north, or red foxes, who often pounce on prey hidden beneath snow by aligning their leap to the geomagnetic field, especially successful when facing northeast, as if the earth whispers here. Even bats, those leather-winged echolocators of the night, have been shown to use magnetic cues during long flights. In a 2014 study, Nathalie Horvath and colleagues found that bats reoriented in response to artificially shifted magnetic fields. Their internal compass didn't just guide them, it calibrated against the sun. All of this points to magnetoreception not as an oddity, but as a deeply integrated sense, woven into behavior, biology, and yes, evolutionary history. But if evolution gave rise to this sense, could we in turn give rise to machines that mimic it? Could we learn from pigeons and turtles, not just in admiration, but in engineering? It turns out, some already are. And that takes us to the edge of nature and technology, where drones begin to fly, not by GPS, but by magnetics, guided in their own way by an artificial compass built in imitation of living ones. Somewhere in a windless lab, beneath the careful watch of graduate students and humming circuits, a machine lifts into the air. It hovers, adjusts, and turns, not by triangulating satellites, not by following a camera, but by reading the planet's magnetic murmur. A robot with a compass. As nature has so often been the blueprint for invention, magnetoreception is now crossing into the realm of engineering. Scientists and designers are building machines, some that crawl, some that fly, that draw inspiration from animals' magnetic sense. The goal? To give artificial systems a way to navigate when GPS isn't available, which, as it turns out, is more often than we think. GPS is a marvel, yes, but it's also fragile, blocked by buildings, jammed by interference, denied in deep oceans or dense forests. And for autonomous systems operating in such conditions, whether underwater, underground, or on other planets, navigation becomes a challenge. Enter bio-inspired magnetosensing. One early success story is the development of robotic fish that use magnetic fields to orient themselves, much like real fish do. In 2015, researchers from the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology (KUNST) built a soft-bodied robot with embedded magnetometers and field sensors, allowing it to feel the artificial geomagnetic environment of a test tank. No cameras, no lights, just the digital equivalent of a trout's nose. Other projects have gone airborne. In 2020, engineers from the University of Hong Kong developed a magnetically guided drone navigation system that mimicked the behavior of migratory birds. By combining magnetometer input with inertial sensors and solar cues, the drone could maintain course in GPS-denied environments, echoing how birds integrate multiple streams of natural data. And in subterranean settings, researchers have begun building burrowing robots inspired by magnetically sensitive mammals like mole rats. These robots use changes in magnetic inclination and intensity to orient in darkness, much as their biological analogues do while tunneling through the Earth. One particularly fascinating tool is the magnetic anomaly map, essentially a detailed chart of local field distortions caused by natural iron deposits, man-made structures, or tectonic quirks. Just as a pigeon may recognize its neighborhood's magnetic fingerprint, a robot can match real-time magnetometer readings to a preloaded map, allowing for surprisingly accurate positioning. This process is called magnetic fingerprinting, and it's already being used in urban robotics. In 2012, researchers at the University of Minnesota demonstrated a small autonomous vehicle that could navigate hallways and rooms by comparing magnetic data with a known map, without vision or radio. The applications are vast: autonomous submarines, space rovers, disaster rescue bots, and wildlife trackers could all benefit from a magnetically based system. Imagine a drone that finds its way through a smoky forest by following the Earth's field, or a Mars rover navigating, using the remnant magnetism of Martian crust, essentially reading the ghost of a planetary compass. Even more speculative is the idea of quantum magnetosensing in machines. Inspired by cryptochrome's entangled electron pairs, some engineers dream of building quantum sensors that exploit similar phenomena, tiny ultra-sensitive devices that can detect minuscule shifts in magnetic orientation with unprecedented accuracy. These aren't just sci-fi concepts. Prototypes already exist in the form of NV center diamond magnetometers, exotic crystals whose defects allow them to sense magnetic fields at the nanoscale. Of course, there's a long way to go before these tools match the elegance and efficiency of biological systems. A pigeon's brain, the size of a walnut, can process vast amounts of sensory data, resolve conflicts, correct errors, and find home, all while flying through wind, weather, and electromagnetic noise. Our machines, for all their sophistication, still struggle to match that adaptability. But that hasn't stopped engineers from trying to decode the animal compass. In some labs, they're implanting magnetite particles into synthetic membranes to simulate the mechanical deformation seen in fish or birds. In others, they're experimenting with protein-mimicking molecules that respond to weak fields, hoping to reverse engineer cryptochrome's quantum trick. And it's not just about mimicking nature, it's about understanding it better. As we build machines to navigate the invisible field, we learn more about how animals may do the same. A robotic model that fails under certain conditions may shed light on what a pigeon avoids, or why a turtle turns. The feedback loop between biology and technology spins on. There's even talk of applying magnetic navigation to human-machine interfaces, wearable devices that use field orientation to guide the visually impaired, implants that align with brain rhythms to restore balance or spatial awareness. The field is young, but full of strange flickering potential, and perhaps that's the real beauty of it. That by watching birds bank on magnetic airways or fish turn on unseen lines, we've started to build our own wings, not of feathers, but of circuits. Our own fins, not of flesh, but firmware. Nature reads the compass, and now, so do we. But the truest signal isn't just technological, it's metaphorical. Because to read a compass, biological or artificial, is to reckon with orientation, with where you are, where you've been, and where you're headed. And so, as we come full circle, let's step back and feel the resonance of it all, what it means to carry a compass within, not just in the hand or code, but in the marrow. You and I standing still or spinning slowly in a chair, eyes closed, uncertain of north, may never feel the world's magnetic pulse as a robin does, and yet, there's something quietly moving in the idea that we are immersed in that same field, that every cell in our body, every molecule in the air, swims in the same invisible sea that guides turtles home and steers salmon through the open Pacific. The magnetic field is not a thing we look at, it is a thing we live in. For most of us, it remains background, silent, scentless, intangible. But for billions of living creatures, it's a kind of music, low and constant, a note of orientation, soft as breath. In the end, that's what this story has always been about, orientation. Not just in space, but in meaning. The ability to know where you are, not just on a map, but in the larger shape of things. Animals that use the Earth's field don't see it as north or south. They feel gradients, slopes, inclinations. They learn to recognize the signature of home, not as a name or a point on GPS, but as a magnetic flavor, a familiarity that exists beyond language. You could call it instinct, you could call it trust, and we, though we may no longer sense those lines with clarity, carry something of it too. Perhaps in the way we feel settled facing a certain direction, or in the comfort of landmarks, those familiar patterns in the fog of life, perhaps in how we navigate uncertainty, not with perfect knowledge, but with quiet calibration. Maybe the compass is less about location, and more about returning to something older than memory, a place, a path, an idea. So much of the modern world is noisy, fast, dazzling, and in that noise, the subtle senses can slip away. But they're still there, waiting, like a needle, floating on the still surface of a bowl, aligning not to what we see, but to what holds everything together. The earth turns, The field shifts, creatures migrate, particles spin, robots whir, and beneath it all, the compass hums on. If you enjoyed this little journey into the secret life of magnetoreception, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Sleep well, fellow traveler. The fields are whispering, and you're always welcome here.